What happens when you stare into the pitch-black woods and the darkness smiles back at you? Imagine you're behind the wheel of a massive multi-ton semi-truck. It's 1:30 in the morning, you're deep inside the Daniel Boone National Forest, and you are entirely alone. There's a specific stretch of highway waiting for you in the fog where logic just breaks down. If you ever find yourself driving this route, you need to listen to me very carefully right now, because I promise you what's waiting out there in those trees is absolutely not an animal.
We're talking about total, suffocating isolation here. You're plunged into this visceral dead zone, miles and miles away from civilization, with absolutely zero cell service. Picture just a narrow, winding ribbon of asphalt completely choked by these ancient, towering trees. It's the kind of profound darkness that makes you realize, exactly how incredibly small and vulnerable we actually are when the modern world just falls away.
So, welcome to our explainer of what locals call the haunting at mile marker 49. It's a chilling, fully documented account from rural Kentucky back in March of 2019. Today, we're going to break down the absolutely terrifying sequence of events experienced by a veteran trucker named Marcus Elliott. He was just running an overnight freight route from Louisville to Hazard. Let's really dissect exactly what went so terribly wrong for him out there in the dark.
Now, you might be wondering, why even take this route? Well, the motivation was pretty simple. $340. That was the weekly hazard pay supplement Marcus picked up this run for. And look, Marcus was a rock-solid 11-year veteran of the road. He definitely wasn't the type to spook easily. But in his rush to grab that extra cash, he completely ignored a massive red flag. Namely, why did the previous veteran driver suddenly, and without any warning, just abandon such a lucrative run?
That red flag actually came directly from that previous driver, a guy named Jerry Pruitt, who had flawlessly run that exact route for 6 years. When Marcus asked him why he was giving it up, Jerry gave him this incredibly cryptic warning. He just said, "Some roads ain't meant to be driven in the dark, son." Marcus, well, he just laughed it off. He honestly thought the older guy was just getting a little soft. Man, he could not have been more wrong.
So the nightmare really kicks off on the night of March 13th. Marcus heads out of Louisville right around 10 p.m., thinking it's just going to be a totally routine drive. But by 1:30 a.m., he hits the deep forest isolation of the mountain parkway. The temperature has plummeted to a freezing 38 degrees. There are absolutely no other headlights on the road, no gas station signs glowing in the distance, nothing. Just this black, impenetrable wall of trees pressing in on both sides of the cab, kind of suffocating him in this sea of absolute nothingness.
Then, at exactly 1:35 a.m., right around mile marker 46, Marcus spots a shape. It's just barely catching the absolute edge of his headlights. And the fascinating, well, terrifying thing here is how the human brain desperately tries to categorize weird things just to protect itself, right? His brain instantly tells him, oh, it's just a deer. But as that massive truck rolls closer, that little rationalization completely shatters. Because this shape, it isn't a deer, it's vertical. It is standing perfectly upright on the shoulder of the road.
And the sensory details of this encounter are just deeply structurally wrong. It looks like a woman, or, at least something shaped like a woman. She's wearing this super thin, pale yellow dress, which makes zero sense for the freezing 38-degree weather. She's standing completely barefoot on the freezing asphalt, and the absolute wildest part, despite the heavy wind buffeting Marcus's giant truck, her long dark hair is perfectly motionless. It doesn't even twitch. Her body just looks stretched, like unnaturally tall and incredibly thin.
So Marcus, trying to be a good guy, actually slows down. He rolls down his window to ask if she needs some help, and that is when she turns to look at him. For years after this, the only way Marcus could even describe it was by saying her face wasn't right. Her eyes were forced open way too wide, like she literally couldn't blink. And when the headlights hit them, they didn't reflect light back like normal human eyes do. They absorbed it, like a total void, all while this grotesque, physically impossible smile stretched across her face. Then, very slowly, she raises a hand and points down the road, pointing exactly where Marcus has to go.
At this point, pure, primal panic completely takes over. Marcus doesn't even make a conscious decision. His foot just automatically slams the gas pedal to the floor. He's gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles are white, staring dead ahead, practically paralyzed by the thought of even checking his rearview mirrors. When he finally works up the courage to glance back, maybe 2 minutes later, the road behind him is entirely, completely empty.
Desperate for some kind of normalcy, he cranks up the radio, desperately trying to convince himself he just saw some wandering, disturbed local. You know, just a trick of the exhausted mind. He's rationalizing hard, but then his headlights catch the green reflective paint of the very next sign on the road, mile marker 49. Literally the exact spot Gurry Pruitt abandoned his entire career over.
Suddenly, he has exactly 3 seconds to react. Right in the middle of his lane, there is this massive shape. Marcus physically stands on the brakes. The sheer momentum of the heavy trailer violently shoves the cab forward. The whole semi-truck skids, loudly shudders, and slams to this utterly terrifying halt. The front grille stops a mere 8 feet away from whatever is blocking the road.
Sitting there in the cab, with his heart just absolutely hammering against his ribs, Marcus peers out and sees what looks like a really large dog, like a shepherd mix. And it is completely motionless. The chest isn't rising, no signs of breathing. Assuming it's just roadkill that could cause a deadly accident for whoever comes around this blind curve next, Marcus grabs his heavy flashlight and actually steps out of the cab. Out into the freezing, dead silent night. I mean, the only sound out there is the ticking of his cooling engine.
He cautiously walks to the front of his truck and shines the blinding light down. The dog's body is entirely inert, definitely dead. But then he looks at the eyes. The eyes are alive. As Marcus steps closer, the dog's eyes literally track him. They follow his every single movement with this cold, terrifying intelligence that makes Marcus's blood run absolutely ice cold. It's this calculating, intensely predatory gaze that absolutely does not belong in the dead stare of an animal.
And somehow, incredibly, it gets worse. The dead dog's mouth starts to open, but not like an animal panting. The jaw literally unhinges, dropping down at an impossible, grotesque angle, and there's no bark. Instead, it lets out this low, bizarre, completely mechanical drone. It's a sound so incredibly deep that it physically vibrates behind Marcus's eyes, hitting him with such force that he actually stumbles backward in sheer horror.
Marcus scrambles backward as fast as he can, vaults into his truck, slams the door and locks it. He's just sitting there, completely paralyzed. He whips out his phone, still 0 bars. He is completely trapped out there. He sits in the driver's seat, violently shaking for 4 agonizing minutes, unable to drive forward, unable to even process what the heck just happened. Finally, he forces himself to look back up through the windshield, and the road is completely empty. The monstrous dog thing just vanished.
Somehow, Marcus finally makes it to the hazard distribution warehouse. It's pushing 4 a.m., and the whole loading dock is just drenched in this thick fog and harsh, eerie blue industrial light. He practically falls out of the cab, pale as a ghost and still violently shaking. A 23-year-old local dock worker named Travis Combs is standing there, and he takes one single look at Marcus's face.
Travis doesn't even ask what happened. He just looks at him and calmly states, "You saw something on the road, didn't you?" When a completely shell-shocked Marcus stammers out asking what he means, Travis just matter-of-factly replies, "Mile marker 49?" And guys, this is where the true, deep dread of this explainer really reveals itself. Marcus's isolated nightmare in the woods, it isn't an isolated incident at all. It is a well-established, terrifying reality that all the locals apparently know about. Travis casually explains that, yeah, about 1 or 2 drivers every year roll into the dock looking exactly like Marcus does right now. And almost all of them never, ever drive that route again. But when Marcus asks what happens to the poor guys who actually do try it a second time, Travis leans in close into the shadows and drops this chilling warning. They see it again, but it's different the second time. Closer.
Now, digging into the source data reveals a pretty shocking final twist to all this. Marcus called his dispatcher, Donna, that exact same morning to permanently drop the route. But the crazy thing? Donna already knew. It turns out she keeps this secret, private logbook hidden away, a list of drivers who've encountered this, whatever this entity is, and point blank refused the run ever again. And as of late 2024, there are exactly 17 crossed out names sitting in that little book.
So, the most terrifying takeaway of this explainer isn't just that there's some monster in the woods. It's the system itself. Despite having 17 terrifying, documented encounters, the logistics company has never once paused the route. That Louisville to Hazard overnight run operates every single night without fail. Because as long as they dangle that $340 hazard pay, there's always going to be a new, completely unaware driver willing to plunge their truck right into the pitch-black maw of those mountain woods. Which leaves us with one incredibly unsettling question to wrap up on. Who exactly is driving that route tonight? Because whatever stands at the edge of those headlights out near mile marker 49, it's still out there, just waiting in the dark. If you survive this terrifying little journey with us today, and you want to uncover more chilling structured deep dives like this, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. You honestly never know what we'll be explaining in the dark next.
You're lying in bed, it's the dead of night, and you hear it, a slow, rhythmic gouging of wood. You hold your breath, creep out of bed, and realize that scratching sound, it isn't coming from outside your front door.
It's coming from the inside. Fresh, pale scratches carved directly into the wood, matching the exact rhythm of a knock you just heard. Whatever it is, it's already locked in there with you.
So you gotta ask yourself, how long has it been in your apartment? Have you checked your walls lately? In today's Explainer, we're breaking down a documented account from Chicago that will absolutely make you question every single creak and groan your building makes in the dark. Okay, let's dive right into this. Part 1. The unremarkable tenant. The setting here is the Hargrove Arms. It's this ancient 1923 brick apartment building in Chicago's Logan Square. You know the type. Groaning elevators, original terrazzo floors, the whole shebang. Now, the building manager, a highly methodical guy named Bernard Kovach, had run the property for 19 years. He's the kind of guy who knows exactly which radiators knock, keeping these meticulous 400-page handwritten maintenance logs. And it's actually within those perfectly ordinary logs that the true horror of this story hides. Enter Claire Ashworth. She's 34, a remote UX designer, and she moves into apartment 4B in September 2020. She lives alone with her orange tabby cat, Persimmon. She pays her rent electronically, on time, every single time. She is, by all accounts, the perfect, unremarkable tenant, which kind of makes what happens to her feel even more deeply unnatural. Part 2. Voices through the wall. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the disruption starts. It's super subtle. Around January, Claire's next-door neighbors in 4A come to Bernard with some very apologetic complaints about unsettling sounds bleeding through their shared wall late at night. They claim Claire is talking, but not on the phone. It sounds like she's talking to someone actually in the room with her. Her neighbor Rosario noted, she keeps saying numbers, like she's counting, but not in order. But when Bernard investigates, Claire's completely confused. I mean, she lives alone and is fast asleep by 11 p.m. Part 3. The maintenance log. Soon, the tenant directly above Claire starts complaining about scratching sounds coming from below, so Bernard, trusting his systematic nature, sits down with his extensive maintenance logs to map out the anomalies. In October, a clicking radiator. In November, a smell, sweet like flowers, but somehow wrong. By December, Bernard himself noted hearing 2 voices in 4B late at night. At the time, he just dismissed all this as simple maintenance quirks or weird tenant behavior. But then, the terrifying reality sets in. And this brilliantly illustrates the pattern. Bernard looks further back in the logs to the previous tenant, Arthur Alderman. Look at this. June 2020, a flowery smell. July, voices heard through the wall. August, Arthur abruptly vacates. The paranormal disturbances didn't start with Claire at all. They were simply continuing. Part 4. 3 knocks in the dark. All right, picture this. February 4th, 11:30 p.m. Bernard is doing paperwork in his ground floor office. He hears footsteps up on the old joists of the 4th floor. He tracks them right to the door of apartment 4B. He listens. 3 deliberate knocks. Then a dead, heavy silence. And then 3 knocks again. It isn't a fist. The sound is slower, way more methodical. Then Bernard hears Claire's muffled voice saying something. And then another voice answers her. Now, Bernard knows every single voice in the Hargrove Arms, but this was absolutely not one of them. He later described it as this utterly inhuman impression of a voice, saying it sounded like the shape of speech, but something missing from the inside of it. He rushes up to the 4th floor. The hallway is totally empty. He stands outside Claire's locked door, raising his hand to knock, but freezes. Down low, right near the floorboards, are 6 fresh scratches on the wood, matching the exact rhythm of the knocks he just heard, coming from the inside of her locked apartment. Part 5. The confrontation.
The very next morning, Bernard confronts Claire, and she looks incredibly worn down, just totally exhausted from some unseen energy drain. Her cat, Persimmon, has literally been hiding in the closet for 3 straight weeks, absolutely terrified of the apartment. When Bernard asks what's wrong, Claire finally breaks. She tells him she tracked down the previous tenant, Arthur Alderman, in a desperate search for answers. His response was chilling. He told her, "Don't try to understand it. Don't try to communicate with it, just move out." Claire looks at the shared wall where the voices come from and makes this devastating confession. She says, "At first I thought I was going crazy. Then I started answering it. That was a mistake." By engaging with whatever was living in those walls, she had essentially locked herself into its dark cycle.
To prove the physical toll it's taking on her, she rolls up her sleeve. Etched right into the skin of her forearm are 3 parallel scratch marks. She tells a horrified Bernard that she wakes up with new ones sometimes. She doesn't even feel them happening in the night.
Part 6. The Endless Cycle. Bernard helps Claire break her lease immediately, and she flees the building. For 6 weeks, apartment 4B sits totally, eerily empty. But you know, the building needs to make rent, and the cycle demands fresh occupants. So in April 2021, Bernard repaints that deeply scratched door and rents apartment 4B to a young, unsuspecting couple of newlyweds. And he tells them absolutely nothing about Claire or Arthur. He really tries to convince himself it was the right, practical decision. But then, June arrives, and Bernard is forced to make a brand new entry in his maintenance log. June 3, 4B tenants report smell. Sweet, like flowers, no source found. The sickening twist reveals itself right there. The horror wasn't tied to Claire. The cycle has already begun again.
Today, Bernard keeps a small wooden cross in his office that definitely wasn't there before 2021. And there's this one detail he still cannot explain. No matter what he does, no matter who lives there, no matter the wiring, the light bulb in the hallway sconce right outside apartment 4B mysteriously burns out exactly every 9 days, without fail. Which brings us to the most terrifying part of this entire explainer. That young couple? The logs show the disturbances escalating, but they haven't left yet. According to the source material, the apartment is currently occupied. So, it leaves us with one deeply disturbing thought. Who is living in your walls right now? Like and subscribe to The Explainer if you want to survive the night. And let us know in the comments if your radiator has been clicking lately.
You are miles from civilization. The campfire is literally on its last legs, giving off barely enough light to see your own hands. And you are completely surrounded by an absolute, suffocating blackness. And then, just beyond the reach of the light, something starts pacing. Welcome to the heavily documented account of the boundary at Smile Hollow. We're going to be looking at a deeply unsettling explainer about what happens when modern, overconfident hikers collide head-on with something ancient and completely unnameable.
Seriously, what would you do if you suddenly realized that darkness was breathing? I want you to truly imagine being trapped out there in the woods. The temperature is dropping fast, and there's something massive, something unseen, and something entirely wrong waiting just inches beyond the edge of your campfire's glow. Look, this isn't just some spooky campfire tale to share in the dark. We are looking at the true, documented account of 4 highly experienced hikers who walked straight into an absolute nightmare.
Okay, let's dive into this timeline, because it all unraveled over just 3 days. July 9th started out as the absolute perfect hike. They had all the hyper-prepared modern gear, feeling completely secure. Then, July 10th hits, bringing the discovery of these violently fresh carvings. And that leads directly to July 11th, which ended in a terrifying, hours-long siege right at the edge of the light.
Section 1. The Descent. The Old-Growth Forest. So, on the second day, the whole pristine, outdoorsy atmosphere took a massive nosedive. The group descended off the main ridge into a section of the Pisgah National Forest that was just different, full of massive, old-growth trees. The canopy was incredibly dense, and honestly, the shadows just seemed to stretch a little bit too far. And that is precisely where one of the hikers, James, spotted it, a pale, fresh cut in ancient bark. This wasn't some old trail marker weathered by the seasons. No, this was a violently fresh wound carved directly into a massive oak tree.
Now, what's really interesting about this, and honestly super unsettling, is the shape of the carving itself. It completely defied any logical explanation. It was a rough circle intercepted by a horizontal line with two vertical lines descending right down from the bottom. It definitely wasn't a standard park trailblaze. Out here, deep in the unmaintained woods, it was entirely, horrifyingly out of place.
You can literally feel the creeping paranoia start to settle in at this point. James looks at it and whispers, "Someone's been through here recently." And here's the kicker. Just 20 minutes after finding that first weird symbol, they found another one, and then another. And they were appearing at mathematically perfect intervals, essentially dragging the group deeper and deeper into the dim, shadowy floor of the valley.
The quiet, heavy dread truly took hold of the group when a fourth symbol appeared. This one was clearly marking the way. I mean, it wasn't hidden behind brush or anything. It was dead center, directly at eye level on the trail's edge. It felt horrifyingly calculated. It was as if something unseen was deliberately herding them forward, guiding them exactly down the path it wanted them to take.
Section 2. Night in Smile Hollow. The Siege.
So they finally reach a flat, open section of the valley floor, but it's surrounded by these incredibly tall, close-knit trees. They immediately build a fire, clinging to it like a life raft, creating this fragile little boundary against the absolute darkness outside it. By 9 p.m., the coals are glowing hot. It's quiet. And then James shatters the silence. He asks, "Does anyone feel like we're being watched?" And you guys, not a single person chuckled. The absolute collapse of their campfire camaraderie was instant. Every single one of them felt eyes on them.
And right on cue, the sounds began. Just outside their 30-foot circle of visibility. Steady, lateral, pacing. You have to understand, this wasn't the random stop-and-start rustling of a foraging black bear. Not at all. It was a deliberate, mechanical, metronome-like movement happening right at the western tree line. It would move north to south, stop, then move south to north. Just pacing back and forth right at the very edge of the pitch black.
Ryan, who's desperately trying to take control of this spiraling situation, grabs a heavy bear canister. He makes himself look as large as possible, and he shouts fiercely into the dark, demanding whatever it is to just leave. And then, the pacing stopped. 30 agonizing seconds passed, then a full minute. And let me tell you, that thick, unbroken silence that followed was somehow infinitely more terrifying than the heavy footsteps had been.
Because as it turns out, the horror had merely shifted over to the eastern tree line. An entirely new sound emerged from the dark over there. One slow breath every 10 seconds. Ryan later reported that it had this deep, resonant quality that made it sound impossibly large. We are talking vastly larger than any bear roaming the Appalachians. It was just standing there, in the total pitch black, patiently, heavily breathing. At this point, the primal panic was just immediate. Ryan looks at the group and commands, "We need to add wood to the fire, a lot of wood, right now." They are desperately feeding the dying flames, trying to push back the dark. But here is the truly terrifying part. As the circle of light expanded from the fresh wood, that massive breathing simply receded to match it. The entity wasn't just randomly wandering around out there, it was actively maintaining an exact mathematically calculated distance from the edge of the light.
Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. What Amber saw. The survivor's confessional.
See, there was a horrifying truth that another hiker, Amber, kept completely secret from the rest of the group that night. It was something she only confessed weeks later. Around midnight, while Ryan and James were dead focused on that western tree line, Amber happened to glance east. And there, standing absolutely still, was a towering figure. It was positioned exactly where the firelight died against the blackness. Literally standing in the last inch of illumination, acting as if it perfectly understood the physics of the light.
She could just barely make out its silhouette, and she said the proportions were entirely wrong. It was significantly taller than a person. The limbs were stretched out way too long to be human, and the head was slightly too large for its frame. It was like this grotesque, towering mockery of human anatomy, and was just silently standing there, watching them desperately burn through their remaining firewood.
But honestly, the most disturbing aspect for Amber wasn't even its terrifying shape. It was its stillness. It was an unnatural, ancient stillness. This wasn't the frozen, tense posture of a startled animal caught out in the open. Not at all. Amber felt deeply in her bones that this thing had been standing in that exact place, in that exact posture, waiting for a very, very long time.
She stared at it for what felt like an absolute eternity. She was too paralyzed by this deep, instinctive dread to even warn the others, terrified that just acknowledging it out loud would break their fragile equilibrium. But then, James shifted his weight on a log. His flashlight beam accidentally swept across the eastern tree line, hitting that exact spot, and in a fraction of a second, the towering entity had vanished. There was no snapping twig, no rustling leaves, just nothing there.
Section 4. The Ranger's Secret. The Aftermath.
Somehow, the group miraculously survived until dawn. The second the sun came up, they practically ran out of the forest. And get this, they were guided the entire way out by even more of those fresh carvings. Ryan went straight to the nearest ranger station to report it. He tells the whole story to a 12-year veteran ranger, Walt Drummond. The ranger just listens with this practiced, terrifyingly neutral expression. He doesn't look shocked. He just calmly reveals that the valley is internally known among the staff as Smile Hollow due to countless undocumented incidents, and he simply offers this stark, chilling warning. Don't go back there at night.
The psychological toll of this was immense. Amber actually ended up moving completely across the country to Portland, just trying to escape the memory of that trip. But her haunting final realization about that night is honestly the most unsettling takeaway from this whole explainer. She said, "I keep thinking about how it was standing at exactly the edge of the light. That's not instinct, that's understanding. It wasn't a mindless beast reacting to fire. It was something deeply intelligent, playing a very deliberate game with their fragile boundary."
And you know, that terrifying intelligence is pretty much proven by the first half of our final twist. See, 9 days later, a specialized ranger team went deep into Smile Hollow. They went to investigate Ryan's report and photograph those violently carved symbols for the record. But when they got to the valley floor, they found absolutely nothing. The trees were wiped clean. Every single deep, pale mark had completely vanished without a trace, as if they were never there.
But the true horror, the thing that really gets under your skin, is the final update to that ranger's file. 6 weeks later, the carvings returned. A completely different hiking party came in and reported the exact same complex symbols, the exact same violently fresh cuts, bleeding pale sap on the exact same ancient trees. The trap was reset, the boundary was redrawn, and it is simply out there, right now, waiting for the next group to wander in.
So, I have to leave you with this final lingering question. Did you survive the night? Because if this dark dive into the unexplained lore of Smile Hollow kept you looking over your shoulder, you absolutely need to hit that like button and subscribe. We're going to be back with way more of these beautifully structured, utterly terrifying true accounts. But until next time, stay focused, stay curious, and whatever you do, stay in the light.